Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sanhedrin Daf Mem Tet. Today's daf is sponsored by Blima Shorchen in loving memory of her mother, Mazal, Tina, Bat, Rina, and David. Okay, we're going to get started today, reminding you, if you're interested in the Hebrew class that Rabbanit Dreyfus is teaching, in coordination with Yeshivat Trisha. It's a course offered on our site. It's free of charge, as all our courses. It's available digitally if you can't make it. It's starting tomorrow evening Israel time. That's Wednesday, and you're welcome to join. It's about chiyuv nashim in issues like the obligation of women in prayer, in Kriyat Shema, in Kiddush, all sorts of Birkat Hamazon, Zimun. Those are the topics of the class. It should be very interesting. Okay, the Gefet, I don't think it went up yet, but the Gefet in English is going to go up today, specifically about Yoav and what we're going to be discussing today. Today is going to be a bit of a Tanakh Shiur for the first half of the daf, which is going to take us to the end of the 6th chapter. So if you need a little break from Gemara, we're going to get it today in both, I would say, Tanakh and Midrash on Tanakh, because a lot of what's going to be said is not exactly clear from the text of the prophets. Okay, we're going to Darshan now. We ended yesterday with the story of Yoav. Okay, how did we get here? We were in the middle of this debate to the property of someone who goes against the king and Moreh Malchut, or gets killed by the king, meaning a Jewish king. At least most of the commentaries think, and all the stories they bring are people who went against Jewish kings were killed by the king. Does their property go to their heirs, or does the property go to the kingdom? So first we went with Achav. We're now off of Achav, and we went to Yoav. And now we're going to see actually how we know Yoav was Moreh Malchut, and maybe Yoav, perhaps he was killed for a different reason. We're going to see a whole judgment between Shlomo HaMelech when he goes to kill Yoav, and Yoav. Okay, the first thing I want to point out is David HaMelech, his last words to Shlomo. Okay, he has a speech where he says to Shlomo, listen, I'm going to die, and this is what I want you to do. And I'm just going to read you the psukim. It's in Malachim Aleph, chapter 2. And he says, גם אתה ידעת את אשר עשה ליואב בן צרויה, אשר עשה לשני שרי צבאות ישראל. You know what Yoav did to me, that he killed Avner ben Ner, who was a Sar Tzava, who was a head of a, now remember, Yoav was also a Sar Tzava, that means the head of the army. Avner ben Ner and Amasa ben Yeter, who are also both Sarei Tzava, which we're going to talk about them soon. We're going to give the whole history. Vayargim, and he killed them both. Vayasid to Mechama b'Shalom. Okay, blah blah blah. And then it says, "Vayitem to Mecham Toba Chagorato Asher b'Monav uBna'alo Asher b'Raglav." Okay, it says he exactly how to translate this. Here, I'll read you from the English. He killed them, shedding blood of war in peacetime, staining the girdle of his loins and the sandals on his feet with blood of war. Okay, and that's the English and the Faria. Now, I just want to remind you, we're going to go back at the end of the first Amud, which is the end of this chapter. We're going to go back to this thing about the feet. Where do the feet have to do with it? And some drasha on that, even though we're not going to say it's directly a drasha on that, but Rashi connects it to the feet. So hopefully I'll remember when we get there to remind you of that. Okay, now now we're going to talk about, so what happened. What we saw yesterday was this scene where Shlomo sends Benayahu, who works for Shlomo, sends him into the temple because Yoav went to the temple. He sees that Shlomo's going to kill him. He goes to the temple to protect himself. He holds on to the corners of the altar as protection. And then we had the whole thing. What was he trying to do? Why was he trying to, was he just trying to buy time? Or was he trying to say that, what was the other option? Now I'm just blanking. Right. Was it because, was it because he didn't want to be killed by the king? Because if he was killed by the king, that would mean his property would go to the king, and he didn't want that. Right. So we saw the two approaches there. Then we had this discussion that apparently went on, which again, doesn't say so in the text, but they elaborate that because it's clear that Yoav said something. And in the end, we see it was an ultimatum he gives to Shlomo. And he said, listen, your father already cursed me. And I can't get two things. You can't both kill me and have me cursed. That was a curse also for his future generation. So he said, either I'll take the curse and don't kill me, or kill me, but the curse is going to go on you. And then we proved at the end of yesterday's daf, we did it kind of quickly, but all the curses that he got were given to David. And it was all future descendants of King David got punished with these punishments. That was what we saw. And the last line we're going to see about this was Amar of Yehuda Amarav, very end of Memchet Amabet. Hainu de Amri Nashi. This is what people say: Tehi luta velo tehi lat. There's like a quip, people say it is better to be cursed than to be the one cursing. Now, obviously, it's not better to be cursed. Nobody wants to be cursed, but they're basically trying to say don't curse people, because if you curse people, it might come back to you. And that is proof from David. Now we're going to talk about how did Shlomo actually kill him, because we're in Masechet Sanhedrin, and we know that to get killed, you have to have a judgment. We don't just kill people, right? So it must be there was a judgment, and Shlomo being known as a judge, right, for the famous story of the babies. Yoav daine, okay? So he brings Yoav in, and he gives him a judgment. They're in court, have a court proceeding, and this is what happened in the court proceeding. Again, this doesn't appear in the text at all, right? But what we're saying is, really, why did Shlomo kill him? Now, if you look at the psukim from David HaMelech, what does it say? David tells Shlomo, kill him because he killed Avner and Amasa. So you would think that's why he got killed. But we saw yesterday that he got killed because he was a moreh b'malchut. So today we're going to see the unfolding of all that. My time, so Amarle, Shlomo says to Yoav, the first thing he does is going to try 3 attempts. We're going to see first, because you killed Avner, Yoav's going to say, I'm not deserving of death for that. Then for killing Amasa ben Yeter, he's going to say, I'm not deserving of death for that. And then it's going to be in the end because he's moreh b'malchut, because he himself rebelled, and we'll see where that is. So let's get some background. Avner was the Sartz of Shaul. Now, if you know the history here, there was a big fight always between Shaul and David. David ends up being the king, and Shaul is very jealous of David, and they end up with a lot of fighting between them. And Avner ben Ner is the Sartz of Yoav and of Shaul. And when Shaul dies, then he goes with Ishbosheth. Okay, he doesn't side with David. He goes with Ishbosheth. There's this big war between the people of Shaul and the people of David, and in that war, Asael is running after Avner to kill him. Now, Asael is the brother of Yoav. Okay, I want to just make sure you don't confuse. There's Amasa ben Yeter, and there's Asael ben Tzruya. Okay, Asael ben Tzruya, they both work with an ayin. They have similar letters. I don't want you to get confused. It's a little confusing. Asael is the first story. Asael is the brother of Yoav. And in the fight, he's on Yoav's side, who's on David's side, and Avner is basically being chased by Asael. And Avner says, listen, if you kill me, I'm going to kill you. Like, if you keep chasing me, I'm going to kill you, he says, basically. Avner was claiming self-defense. And then, basically, Asael continues to chase him, and Avner kills him. Then, Yoav basically says, why did I kill Avner? Amarle, go el hadam da Asael havai. I'm the relative of Asael. He killed Asael. He's deserving of death. And therefore, I killed him. Right now, we talked about this already. We're going to talk about a lot more, that who's supposed to kill the murderer? The one whose family, right? Who's the family of the murdered one. They're the ones we saw about the Sokel Yada Edim Tiababrishan. When it comes to murder, it's specifically the relative. So Yoav's saying, I was just fulfilling the Torah law. I was killing him because he killed my brother. So Shlomo says to him, Asael rodef hava. What are you talking about? Asael was a rodef. He was trying to kill Avner. Avner just did this in self-defense. Amar le, hayalo lahatzilo be'echad me'evarav. He said, no, he should have shot him in the leg. Now, this is all a promo to what we're going to get to in Daf Ayin Gimel about the whole din of rodef, and if someone's chasing someone else, are you allowed to kill them? Do you have to shoot them in the leg? Right? This is these issues are super relevant in all sorts of things. Policemen, that comes up in the army all the time. You're supposed to shoot someone in the leg. There's rules about doing this. You don't just kill everybody who you see, right? Depends on the situation. It depends on what. This comes up a lot. So he said, Yoav said, you shouldn't have killed him. You should have shot him in the leg. So Amar Le, Shlomo says, Lo Yachyale, he wasn't able to. Okay, even though he was the head of the army, maybe he wasn't such a sharp shooter. He didn't know how to aim properly. Amar Le, Yoav says, what are you talking about? Of course he did. He killed him right by the fifth rib. Now, behind the fifth rib, according to what we're going to see in the tradition, is the liver and the mara. I forget the bladder, the gallbladder. So it says, how do we know he shot him right there? Which basically means if he shot him right there, that's how you kill someone. And he obviously knew how to shoot, and he obviously had good aim, which makes sense if he was the head of the army. It says when Avner kills Asael, it says he killed him. This it says in this pasuk by the ela chomesh. What is the chomesh? Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan explained bidofen chamishit. The chomesh, first of all, chomesh is often like ammunition to find someone like that. But they say this is a why chomesh comes from the fifth. The fifth what? The fifth rib. Bimkom shemara v'kaved tzluyim bo. Okay, where the gallbladder and the liver are situated. So if he could shoot him right there and have perfect aim to kill him, what, you think he couldn't do that? Right? You think he couldn't kill him? You think he couldn't shoot him in the leg? Of course he could have. And Yoav says, basically, I killed him for the right reason. He should not have killed my brother. He should have just shot him in the leg to prevent him from killing him. And therefore, I was allowed to kill him. I just want to mention, we're going to get back to this story later, but when does Yoav kill Avner? So this is also interesting. Avner, so after, okay, there's this war between the people of Ishbosheth and the people of David, Avner ends up making a pact with David and goes over to David's side, which obviously Yoav sees as a bit of a threat, right? Yoav's concerned he's going to take my position, right? When you get the head of the army of the other side, perhaps he'll come into his position. And that's when Yoav basically goes, he calls Avner and he kind of tricks him into coming to him. And then he tricks him into, and then he kills him. And we're going to see that later on. So that's when he kills Avner, and that's what we thought he was responsible for. But turns out he wasn't. Even though David says he killed Avner, right? According to the tradition here, Shlomo had a judgment with him, and no, he wasn't responsible for that. Okay, so Amarle, Shlomo continues. He's not willing to let him go. First of all, he's got David's words in his head. Okay, fine. If not Avner, then Amasa ben Yeter. Nasal Avner. So, okay, forget Avner. I got that. But my time, Amasa. Why did you kill Amasa ben Yeter? Now, who's Amasa ben Yeter? He was the on Avshalom's side when Avshalom rebelled against David. There were a lot of rebellions. When Avshalom, his son, rebels against David. So what happened? Amasa ben Yeter was on Avshalom's side. At the end of the whole thing, Yoav kills Avshalom, much to David is very upset about it. He didn't tell him to do that, and he's very upset that Yoav killed Avshalom, and he decides to replace him as Sar Tzava. And who does he choose? Avshalom Sar Tzava Amasa ben Yeter. And he takes Amasa ben Yeter to be his Sar Tzava, and Yoav is obviously very upset about this. And what happens in the next story is Sheva ben Bichri has a rebellion against David. As I said, a lot of rebellions. In that situation, you have all of Israel on one side and just Yehuda on the other. And that's, on David's side. And they have this battle. And David tells Amasa, who's his head of his army, go bring soldiers. And Amasa doesn't show up. He says, you have 3 days to bring soldiers. And he doesn't show up with the soldiers in 3 days. It says, Va'uchal, he comes late. And then David sends other people to go out, among them Yoav. And when they go to fight against Sheva ben Bichri, they meet Amasa coming late, and Yoav kills Amasa right then. Okay, so the question is, why did you kill Amasa? To which he says, Amarle, Amasa mareh b'malchut hava. Right? Who made Yoav into the court? I don't know, but he said, I was killing him because he rebelled against the king. Said, bring me the people of Judea in 3 days. The pasuk says he went to get Yehuda, vayocher, and he comes late. Amarle. So now Shlomo says, oh, Amasa had a good reason. He wasn't a mareh b'malchut. Amasa, get ready for his answer. Akin v'rakin darash. That means he darshaned achs in the Torah and rocks in the Torah. Now, rock is the one we're going to use. Ach and rock are limitations. Okay, they're words of saying, right, only or but. So rock means only. So what was his drasha? Well, eshkachinu de patak lumba b'sechta. When he got there to get the issue out of fight, what were they doing? They were learning Torah. Okay, they were learning a Masechet. Okay, Masechet didn't exist then, but this is common that the rabbis kind of throw back, things in their time must have been going on in that time. And they say they were sitting learning Torah. Okay, so what did he say? Now, you have people learning Torah, and the king tells you have to go out to war. What do you do? Okay, this sounds all too familiar to the topic of conversation in Israel. Do you learn or go out to war? So Amar, this is what Amasa said. Tiv kol isha she'amret picha v'leishmat v'recha l'chol asher titzavenu yuma. This is what in the beginning of Sefer Yoshua, God tells Yoshua. We're not in Yoshua now, but this was the drasha that Amasa said. God says to Yoshua, anyone who doesn't listen to you will be killed. Okay, you're a leader. People have to listen to you. What if it's for Torah? Meaning, what if either they have to learn Torah? What if he says something that goes against the Torah? What if there's a conflict between God and the leader? Then who do you listen to? Talmud Lamal, Rak Chazak V'Amatz. It says, right, this is famous, Yoshua is told, Rak Chazak V'Amatz. Now it should say Chazak V'Amatz, right? Be strong. But it says only, right, or Rak, okay, which is a limitation, saying you're limited. If the king tells you to do something, or the leader tells you to do something that's against Torah, then against what God says, then we listen to God. So that's what Amasa darshaned. He said, I'm going to come late because the people are learning Torah, and they have to continue to learn Torah, and I can't bring them out to war. And that's why he came late. Okay. Fascinating issue. And what does this mean? Okay, so if you have the choice, right, you go learn Torah. So first of all, I was pleased to see that the commentaries, there's some commentaries that ask the question, but wasn't this a Mechemet mitzvah? And in a Mechemet mitzvah, of course you don't sit and learn, you go out and you fight. So that's number one. There's a Mechemet mitzvah and people's lives are at stake. Everyone's required to get out of the Beit Midrash and go learn Torah. And even if you take this position and you say this position says, right, that they should have learned, they're saying Amasa darshan yachid b'rachim, meaning he had a reason why he was moreh b'malchut. It doesn't necessarily say he was right, because in the end Yoav kills him, and in the end Yoav is not accused of murder for killing him. So what they were trying to do is to try to justify why Amasa did what he did and why we don't view it as miridah b'malchut because he thought it was the right thing to do. It doesn't necessarily mean it was the right thing to do. So anyway, this is a big topic nowadays about the balance between learning Torah and doing the army. And here you see a sugya that relates to it. Ella. So that didn't work. So now Yoav seems to be able to walk out of court. I mean, David said it's because of Amasa and it's because of Yoav. And here he ends up, really not guilty. So Elahu Gavra Moreh b'malchut hava. So now they talk about him in third person, but they say this guy, meaning Yoav himself, you're a moreh b'malchut. Dichtiv v'ashmoa ba ad Yoav ki Yoav nata acharei Adoniyahu v'acharei Avshalom lo nata. So now they hear this is in the Adoniyahu rebellion when David is at the end of his life, and Shlomo is supposed to take over, and Adonijah comes and tries to do a rebellion and say, I'm the one. And he hears that Yoav went with Adonijah and he didn't go with Avshalom. Okay, what do you mean? And he didn't go with Avshalom. What does that have to do with anything? Avshalom is not here anymore, right? What it's trying to tell you in the pasuk, and the Gemara is going to darshan this, why they tell you this, that when there were two sons of David who rebelled, one was Avshalom, one was Adonijah. Avshalom was already before. It's trying to tell you that Yoav didn't go with the rebellion of Avshalom, but he did go with the rebellion of Adonijah. Okay, it's a little bit of a strange fact to be telling us. We know he didn't go with Avshalom. We were there, right? We read the story. Why would you be telling us this? My lonata. Why does it tell you that? Amar Rabbi Yehuda should be kish lintot vilonata. Well, he wanted to side with Avshalom, but he didn't. Now we're going to have to figure out why didn't he? But maybe it's trying to say that even though he only rebels against David at the end by going with Adonijah, he actually wanted to earlier, but just didn't think it was tactically the right thing to do. Amar Rabbi Elazar, my time alone, so why didn't he go with Avshalom before? Amar Rabbi Elazar, we're going to have two answers. David was still young and vibrant and strong. And, maybe you say he didn't want to be on the losing side. He thought David was going to win. Or maybe he was scared of David because David was so strong. Where obviously, the whole prelude to Adonijah rebelling is David sitting in bed and he's so weak and he's so tired. He needs this Avishag Shunamid and, he's old. He's obviously not at his prime anymore. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina Amar, he says a different reason. Adayin itzdagnine shel David kayamin. Usually itzdagninim are those who look at the stars, but many people, there's a debate about how to translate this here, but I'm going to go with the interpretation that this next line is really explaining this, that the itzdagninim are the strong. David had these strong, we learned about them, we're going to see them right now, these very strong warriors. Da'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, arbameot yeladim hayulo leDavid. In other words, at that point, he still had these 400 really tough soldiers. Who are they? 400 sons of David. Kulam b'nei Yifat Torah. We learned about them in the beginning of the Masechet. They were all the daughters of women who David captured in war. Okay, they were all Gentiles, and they had these Gentile haircuts. And they would go out in the front. Some people say they didn't even fight; they just looked scary. Okay. And these were the tough guys of David who scared everybody. Okay. Now, right, often we say Jews are not exactly the strongest. Nowadays with our army, I think our image is a little different. But here we have it, right? We're not always treated as warriors, but he had these other Gentile warriors that were his strong guys, and that's why they were very strong in the time of Avshalom, but not anymore by the time we get to Adonijah. Upliga de Rabbi Abba Bar Kana. This disagrees with what Rabbi Abba Bar Kana says. It's not clear what this is. Some people say it's the whole story, because the whole story basically puts Yoav in a bad light. Some people say it's this last thing about these armored warriors. So it's a little unclear how to read this, but let's see what he says. The Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Kana, Ilmale David Yo Asa Yoav Milchama, Vilmale Yoav Lo Asak David B'Torah. Okay, some people say that what this is trying to say is David didn't go out to war with these 400 warriors. He never went out to war because Yoav did that. Okay, and that he wasn't a warrior. And here we're getting back a little bit to this balance game that in the whole issue of the Haredi draft, there's this argument that they make, which is we need to learn, and that gives you strength to go out and fight. And that's really what's being described in this pasuk. Now, maybe that works better when there's coordination between the two sides. It's hard to say when there's such strife between the two sides that this really works. But this is describing some sort of ideal, and we're going to get it from a pasuk. And again, it's one approach, right? It's a different approach than the one we saw before. It's the Gemara is telling you this, the plige de Rabbi. So this is one idea. It doesn't necessarily mean everyone agrees with this. David lo asa Yoav milchama. Were it not for David, Yoav wouldn't be able to fight. Yoav lo asak David b'Torah. And if it weren't for Yoav, David wouldn't be able to learn Torah. Okay, basically, David's learning was what gave Yoav the strength to fight, and Yoav's fighting was what gave David the opportunity to learn. How do we get this? Because it says, Vayhi David oseh mishpat utzedakah l'cholamo. By the way, notice they're taking mishpat utzedakah as if that sounds like judgment he was doing and justice in the world. What their understanding is it means he learned Torah, okay, sat in yeshiva, so to speak. So he's oseh mishpat utzedakah l'cholamo, v'Yoav ben Tzruya latzava. The pasuk is describing the roles. David was doing justice in the nation, and Yoav was the one in charge of the army. So now they say, why is this all in one pasuk together? Matam David oseh mishpat utzedakah l'cholamo. Why was he able to do this? Mishum Yoav ala tzava. Yoav took care of the army stuff. That let him free to be able to, again, the way they understand it, to learn Torah. Umatam Yoav ala tzava. Mishum David oseh mishpat utzedakah l'cholamo. Right? And Yoav was able to succeed in the army because David was creating mishpat utzedakah in the world. If you take this pasuk literally in the drasha literally, and you don't take it to the world of Torah learning, which again is really only because they start with that first line, without David, right? Without Ilmale Yoav lo asak David b'Torah, David wouldn't be able to do Torah. It actually seems to be describing this beautiful balance of power, right? There's someone who's in charge of the army, and that relieves the other person to be free to focus on justice and creating a just society. And also, without a just society, it's very hard to have an army, right? You need to have a just society to be able to also have an army and fight wars. So anyway, it's an interesting idea about this balance. And they're taking it to the Torah learning and how the Torah balances out. And one was in charge of Torah learning, one was in charge of the army, and that created this beautiful, harmonious picture, which again, like I said, even if you would apply this to nowadays, unfortunately, it's not a very harmonious picture here because they're not working in sync with each other at all. In fact, both sides are at odds with each other. But anyway, it's hard to read this stuff without thinking about current issues that are going on. Now we want to go back. So we're done with Avshalom. We basically accused we're done with Yoav. We've accused Yoav of being a moreh b'malchut, and that really is why Shlomo kills him. Even though, interestingly, in the Psukim with David, he says kill him for these other reasons. But in the end, those other reasons don't pan out. You can't really convict him for those things because each person kind of had a reason. There was a way to explain it, and in the end, he's punished because he went with Adonijah. But now we want to see the scene when he killed Avner. And there's some psukim that need some explanation. David, so he leaves after David makes this brit with Avner. Then Yoav leaves from David. He sends messengers to Avner. Vayashivu otomi bor hasira. Now they take him back from the bor. Bor is usually a pit, and the sirah. Okay, the sirah. We don't know what this is. We're going to translate sirah soon as a thorn. Okay, so what is this bor hasira? My bor hasira. Amar Rabbi Abba bar Kahana bor v'sira garmulo laavner she'eharek. Again, in Masechet Sanhedrin, there's this, and in general, and we'll see this in Makot also, there's a sense that nobody dies for no reason, and there must be a reason why Avner was killed. In other words, maybe, Yoav did it and whatever, and then he claims he was the Goel Hadam, but seems not even so clear, but Yoav must have done, Avner ben Ner must have done something that also caused him to die early. So what is this? Well, Yashivo Tomi Bor Sirah, that's a remez to the fact that the bor and the sirah is what took him down. What is the bor? What is the sirah? So Rashi mentions these two stories with David HaMelech, where David took this flask of water that was right next to, if you remember, Shaul was trying to kill David all these times, and then David sneaks into his tent at night and he pulls out this flask of water, and he tries to prove from there, look, I could have killed him and I didn't, right? I snuck into his tent, he didn't even see me, I could have killed him. And there's another story where he tears the cloak of Shaul and also shows I tore his cloak, I could have killed him. And both those cases, they say that Avner basically said to Shaul, it wasn't from David, right? That Sapachat was the people left it, your flask somewhere, your Chayalim did it. It wasn't that David came in and snuck in. And it wasn't that he did that to your cloak because there was a coat, there was a thorn in it, and because of that it tore. And he basically said, he could have saved the relationship between Shaul and David and said, look, right, you really look, David's not trying to kill you, and don't see him as a threat. So because he didn't do that, that's why he was killed. Vayateu, now it continues. Vayateu Yoav al toch hasha'ar ledaber ito basheli. Okay, so two things. What's the sha'ar and what's the sheli? Amar Rabbi Yochanan shedano din Sanhedrin. What is the sha'ar in the Torah? It's always the court. So now we're going to get to the court hearings with Yoav and Avner. Now, obviously, there were no court hearings. He killed him right there, right? But apparently, right, the Gemara, especially, were in Sanhedrin. There must have been a court. There must have been a trial. So what was the trial about? Well, we know what the trial is going to say because it's exactly what Yoav said to Shlomo when he was going to convict him upon the death. So it's going to be kind of a repeat of that. My time a kataltel Asael. Why did you kill my brother Asael? Asael wrote Hayas. So Avner says he was trying to kill me. He says he should have shot him in the leg. Lo yachlile. I couldn't, Avner said. All right, I'm not such a good shot. So obviously Avner says to him, you killed him right by the fifth rib. You obviously are a good shot. And what? You're telling me you couldn't have shot him in the leg? Of course you could. Okay, we're going to get back to the shoe now. When he mentions in that pasuk I showed you, he was killed because of it. It said about the shoe there. So what does the shoe have to do with anything? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav al iskei shalo. Okay, shal na'alechem raglecha. You know that, take off your shoe. That's what Yoshua is told. That's what Moshe is told. So now shal has to do with shoes, and they say, what does it mean? He killed him. L'daberi tobasheli. He tricked him. He asked him according to Rashi, asked him some question about chalitza. How do you do the chalitza? He bends down to show Yoav, and when he bent down, he kills him. It's like the way he tricked him into killing him. And notice what it says there, Vayakeu Shama Chomesh. He kills him in the Chomesh. What's Chomesh? And then Yoav kills him exactly where he killed his brother. So what's this, right? This is the pasuk we saw that, this is the next pasuk. After David tells Shlomo, I want you to kill these people, it says, Ve'yeshiv Hashem et amo, Rosho, God will return the blood, the blood on his head. Asher pagah b'shnei anashim tzadikim v'tovim mimenu. He killed two people who were better than he was. So in what way were they better than him? Asher pagah b'shnei anashim tzadikim tovim shayu dorshim akim v'rakim v'hu lo darach. Now we're going to bring up this akim v'rakim. Amasa said, these guys are learning Torah, right? We can't take them out to war. God and the king tells me one thing, God tells me something else. I have to go with God. Apparently Avner also did that in one situation. What was that? In Nov, if you remember, the city of Nov, they helped David, and and Shaul said, kill all the people. And Avner disagreed with him. We had a whole debate. Could he have stopped Shaul? And he didn't, but at least he disagreed with him and he didn't go along with him. So there you have Shaul telling you to kill them and God saying, what is this? You can't kill people. You can't kill a whole city just because they helped defeat. And he went against what the king said. So that shows they were great. But who lo darash? He didn't. And where was he in the same situation? With Rashi tells us with Uriah Hittite. When David sleeps with Bathsheba, right, and wants to get Uriah killed, he writes him a letter. Okay, we're going to get to that in a second. He writes him a letter saying, and basically Yoav gets him killed. And he should have said, no, I'm not doing this. This is not right. But he didn't. So that's why they were better than him. So now, tzaddikim, why? So that's why they're tovim. Why are they tzaddikim? Because shehem bepeh v'lo asu, they heard directly from the king, which is much stronger than seeing it in writing. They heard it directly from his mouth, and they didn't do it anyway. V'hu be'igeret v'asa, and he saw it in a less powerful manner because he didn't hear from the king himself. He just read it in a letter, and yet he did it anyway. So that shows that they were really tzaddikim mimenu. Amasa lo nishmar b'cherev asher b'yad Yoav. Now, when he goes to kill Amasa, we're switching now to that story. It says he wasn't nishmar b'cherev asher b'yad Yoav. What does that mean? Amarav shelo chashado. He had no clue this was coming. He didn't see it coming. He didn't suspect that Yoav was going to kill him. But now we finally end with all of a sudden, even though we've really put down Yoav, although we did see he had a few good claims, but now we're going to all of a sudden talk about some positive things about Yoav. Not really sure why they're doing this at the end. But he's buried in his house in the desert. What, he lived in the desert? That doesn't make any sense. His house was like a desert. A desert is open to anybody. His house was an open door policy. Anyone could come in. We're going to see that he also gave a lot of food to poor people. Davar acher, kimidbar, a different way. The desert has no stealing and no arayot. Not sure why they say that about a desert. The desert doesn't have that, but let's just assume that's a given. Okay, his house was free of theft. It was free of licentious behavior. Interesting that, right? They're trying to put Yoav in a good light. Like he did have a lot of redeeming qualities. Yoav yechayet sharat. Here's another pasuk about him, and he would sustain the people in the city. Amarav Yehuda afilu munyuni v'tzachanta ta'im parislu. Even these delicacies, these little fish that were delicacies, sounds like caviar or something. He would feed the poor people like caviar. That was like, it wasn't just he would feed them, basic bread. He gave them really nice delicacies. And with that, Hadran alach nikmar adin, and we go to the new chapter. Turning now to Memtet Amud Bet. Arba mitot nimseru lebeitim. We finally get to this famous machloket we keep hearing about, Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. What is the order of the 4 deaths? Skila, sreifa, hereg, v'chenek. This is the basic way. It's stoning, burning, killing with a sword, and strangulation. Rabbi Shimon omer, sreifa, skila, chenek, v'hereg. He flips the first 2 and he flips the last 2, okay? Sreifa is more chabor than skila, and chenek is more chabor than hereg, okay? Strangulation, more severe than killing by the sword. Zo mitzvata niskalim. It's a bit of a weird sentence. In the Mishnah, it's not so typical, but it's saying what we talked about until now was all about skila, right? Remember, we talked about the hanging and we talked about all that. That was all skila, and now we're going to get to the others. Amarava, Amarav Schora, Amarav Huna. So now almost our whole daf now is going to be talking about this issue of order of Mishnah in a Mishnah, and is the order important? Is the order not important? So Rava says in the name of Rav Schora, in the name of Rav Huna, so we'll call this Rav Huna in the end because Rav Huna is speaking. It's Rav Huna who's quoted. Anytime the rabbis numbered things, okay, which could mean they gave it a number and then a list, or maybe even just a list, because we're going to see some of these places there's no number that appears, but they did things in as if there's an order to them. There really is no order. There's no importance to the order whatsoever. Chutz mishivas samanim, except for one Mishnah that talks about 7 cleansing materials, cleansing chemicals. We're going to see in a minute. Ditnan, shiv'a samanim mavirim ala keten. If you have a stain on a cloth, this is a Mishnah Nida. We want to know, is this cloth, piece of clothing, whatever it is it impure? Is it blood? How do you know? There's a test. You try to remove it with one of these 7, or maybe all these 7 we're going to see right now. You try to clean it with any of these cleansing agents. If it comes off, then it's blood. If it doesn't come off, then it might be dye, because dye doesn't come off. So we put 7 of these things on the ketem, and according to what Rav Huna is saying, the order is significant. So rok tafel, okay, I'm not going to explain everything because you're not going to know what all these things are anyway, or maybe you will, I don't know. But rok tafel is basically saliva from the morning before you've eaten anything. Megrisin is saliva after you've eaten groats, or like the stuff from like beans or something. I forget what they're exactly. Grisim. Meraglaim is urine. Neter is lye. Neter is not natar. Something like that. It's natran, I think it's called. Borit is lye. Camellia is this camellia plant, and ashlach is some other substance. Okay, potash it's called. So these are all 7 substances. They're all cleansing agents. Okay, they use saliva for cleaning apparently. Anyway, you have to do them in this order. Okay, Katani Seifa, it says at the end of that Mishnah, it even says it explicitly. He'eviran shelo kesidran. If you did them in a different order, o she'eviran shivatan ke'echad, you use them all at once, lo asav lo klum. That's not a good test to figure out if this is blood or if this is not. Okay, some people explain the it's not a test, it's something else, but I'm going to leave that aside right now. Rav Papa Saba Mishmei de Rav Amar. Okay, not the usual Rav Papa, the elder Rav Papa. He lived a few generations before. He said the name of Rav. You can see he was early because Rav was the first Amora. So he said in the name of Rav, Af Arba Mitot Midakamaflig Rabbi Shimon Shmamina Dafka Katani. How could you say it's only the Mishnah Nida? Our Mishnah is clearly in a particular order, because otherwise, if our Mishnah wasn't in a particular order, then what would Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis be arguing about? They both agree which of the 4 mitot beitin, right? Their argument is about what's the order. So of course our Mishnah is also in a particular order. So he says, Idach, how would Rav Huna explain this? Well, beplug to lo kamari. He was talking about Mishnayot that don't have a machloket in them. Obviously, our Mishnah has a machloket, and the order is important. But I'm talking about, or Rav Huna would say, I was talking about Mishnayot that don't have any sort of debate in them. Okay, and then if there's an order, the order is not intentional except for that one Mishnah Nida. Now we're going to see some other people come and say, wait, there's other Mishnayot, which isn't a surprise, right? And some people go, wait a minute, but this has a particular order. So Rav Papa Amal Af Seder Yoma. The whole, if you remember Yoma, almost the entire Masechet except the last chapter was a description of what happens starting from the week before Yom Kippur, right, to the Yom Kippur day and all the avodot you do, and what, the order's not important. Af Seder Yoma Ditnan, it even says it in the Mishnah. All the things of Yom Kippur that were written in a particular order, if you do one before the other, it's not valid. So what's Rav Huna going to say to that? He says that's just a stringency. Now, what does it mean, a stringency here? So Rashi explains what it means is, first of all, it says in the Torah chukah. Chukah generally means, and we're going to see this a lot, I think it comes up in Zvachim about korbanot, and when it says chukah, it means it has to be done exactly in that way. There's a whole discussion always, like, when is it something ma'akev, when is it not, what are the criteria? Anyway, it says chukah there, that means it has to be done in that way. But not because there's some significance to the order. Like in the Sheves Samanim, there's a significance to the order. Each one, like the first one is the most significant. Then it gets less, and that's why you have to go in this particular order. But in Yom Kippur, it's not that one is more important than the other. It's just that the Torah said this is the way you do it. So we do it that way because it says chukah, you have to keep it that way. It's not that there's a reason particularly for the order. Okay, it's just that there is an order and it's chomer to do it like the Torah said. So Rav Papa said that should have been on your list, and Rav Huna would answer, again, he's not here to answer, but he would answer, that's not what I meant. In other words, I was talking about where the order has a significance, where it goes from like more strict or more important to less important. Rav Huna Braid Rav Yoshua Amar, he says, there's another one, Af Seder Tamid. And when they would bring the daily sacrifice, the Tamid in the morning and the evening, there's a whole description in chapter 7, it's the last chapter in Tamid, where they talk about the Kohen would take the different parts, like there would be someone who would bring each of the parts of the animal, they would chop up the animal into parts, a little bit unpleasant, but then they would take the parts and then they would burn them on the altar. And he would take that and he would throw it onto the altar. He would take that piece, he would throw it onto the altar. So the question is, does it have to be done exactly in that order? So Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, not the same Rav Huna as before, says also that has to be done. De katane Allah, because what does it say in the Mishnah? Ze seder hatamid. Ze seder tamid. This is the order of the tamid. So sounds like the order is very important. The idach mitzvah ba'alma. Well, what would Rav Huna answer to this? That's just ideally, but you don't really. It doesn't really matter which parts you burn on the altar first. It's better to do it in this way, but if you don't do it that way, of course, you're going to fulfill your obligation. So what we started with is Rav Huna was quoted as saying, order is never important in the Mishnah other than this one Mishnah of the Samminim. Then we bring up three other exceptions, right? Our Mishnah, he said, oh no, that's machloket. I wasn't talking about cases where there's a debate about it. Rav Papa Saba brings up the Yoma. We resolve that, right? We say, okay, he was just, that's just a chumrah. That doesn't mean there's an order particular. And sorry, did I say it right? Yeah, and Rav Huna, Bered Rav Yoshua, brings up the Seder Tamid. Okay, so we had, I think I said it wrong though. Rav Papa Saba brought up our Mishnah. The other Rav Papa, the one we're more familiar with, brought up the Maseh Yom Kippurim, and Rav Huna, Bered Rav Yoshua brings up the Seder Tamid, which we basically say it's not really make or break. Okay, maybe better, but not make or break. Now they want to say, what was Rav Huna trying to tell you? Where you might have thought the Mishnah means a particular order and it doesn't really need to be done in that order. So now we're going to bring two situations, which brings us really to almost the end of the daf, and the end of this sugya, which is what two situations is the order in the Mishnah not important at all? So la'afuke mi mitzvah chalitza ditnan. Okay, when it talks about chalitza, mitzvah chalitza, what do you do? Bahu v'yivim to lifnei beitin. Okay, so they come before the court. Hayu notnim lo etzah hogenet lo. Okay, how do we know this? Okay, so first of all, let's explain what this means. I don't know if you remember this, but I always found this interesting. When you can either do yibum, the brother can marry, right? This is the husband dies without children. The brother's supposed to marry the wife. So they give him advice, particularly to him, because you can either do yibum and marry her, or you can do chalitza and get out of it. And then she's free to marry whoever she wants, but not until she does chalitza. So they look at the situation. Are these two people right for each other? Like, is he very old and she's very young? And then they'll say, listen, not really appropriate for you to marry her, or the reverse, right? So they give him advice based on who he is and who she is, and whether it's relevant for them to get married or not. How do we know this? Because it says, which are the judges, vidibru elav, and they speak to him. It doesn't say what they said to him. So they add, oh, it must be. They say to him, is this right for you or not? And then she says, this is all the Mishnah describing what's supposed to happen. She says, my Yabam won't marry me. He says, yes, I don't really want to marry her. They have to speak in Hebrew. And then she takes off his shoe and she spits in front of him. The Dayanim have to see the saliva, another issue of saliva that comes up in our daf. Right, we had it with the cleaning materials. And then she says, this is what they do this is what happens to a person who doesn't want to have his brother's name, keep his brother's name going. And they will call him Chalutz Hana'al. Okay, he's the guy who had the chalitza done to him. Va'amar Rav Yehuda, mitzvat chalitza, and Rav Yehuda explains there that mitzvah chalitza, this is the mitzvah. Korah, she says. Koreh, he says. Poletzet, she takes off the shoe. V'rokeket, she spits. V'korah, and then they call him by name. So, Havinaba, they asked Rav Yehuda, my kamashma, what are you telling us? You're just repeating the Mishnah, but in shorter words. Like, what was your point? Ha kamashma, what he was trying to say is, mitzvah hachi, that's the ideal way to do it. The apich leit lamba, but if you don't do it in that order, it's fine. And that's what we're saying Rav Huna was coming to say, is that he agrees with Rav Yehuda that this order is not important. And Tanya Namihachi, there's a brighter that even proves this. Bein shikdim chalitza l'rikika, rikika l'chalitza, whether you do first the chalitza, then the spitting, or first the spitting, then the taking off the shoe, masha sasui, it's fine, it doesn't matter. And another one, lafuke mehaditnan, kohen gadol meshamesh b'shmona kelim ve'edyopa arba'a. Okay, the kohen gadol will wear eight garments, and the hedyot will wear 4. Bikchonet b'mechnasayim b'mitznefef avneit. Okay, those are the names of the 8 garments that the Kohen would wear. He would wear the 4 of the regular Kohen and another 4 that were specifically unique to him. Vitanya, minayin shelo yehi davar kodem lemichnasayim. And the Braita says, how do you know? You have to put the pants on first. Shenemar umechnasei bad yual b'saro. That should be the first thing on his flesh. I mean, it doesn't say first, but they darshan it from that pasuk. The pants go first. Notice what was listed. The ketonet came before the pants. So you see that the order of the Mishnah is not significant. So if the pants go first, why didn't they put the pants first? Why did the Tan of the Mishnah write first the ketonet, which is the robe, the cloak? Shenema umechnese bad Yoav. Sorry, v'tana my time akdame ketonet. Why did he do that first? Mishum de akdame kra, because the pasuk put ketonet first. So the Mishnah was just mimicking the Torah. So the obvious question: ukra my time akdame. Why did the pasuk put the ketonet first? Mishum de machasir kule gufa adifle. They preferred to talk about the garment that covers his whole body first. Okay, so they had a reason for doing it first, but the order has nothing to do with anything, and that's again Rav Huna, who said the Mishnah of the Sammanim was specifically the order was coming to say, but not the case of Chalitza and not the case of the Kohen Gadol. And we're just going to get a little bit started on this last sugya. Skila Sreifa, because it really is mostly in tomorrow's daf. Skila Chamura Sreifa. How do we know that Skila is more Chamor from Sreifa? And then we're going to have to explain why Rabbi Shimon thinks Sreifa is more Chamor. The one who curses God and the one who worships idols gets that. Well, what worse thing is there than those two things? Basically denying God. That is denying the basic essence of Judaism, that God is our God. Adraba, Sreifa Chamura. What do you mean? Sreifa is Chamura. Shekain nitna lebat kohen shezinta. The daughter of a kohen who goes and sleeps with another man while she's married gets Sreifa. Why is it so bad? Et avia. She's disgracing her father, and her father is the kohen who's a representative of God. That's worse. Okay, I don't know. You can think about what's worse. Anyway, we're going to get back to this tomorrow, and we're going to see the continuation of this discussion. So what we saw today, we started with Yoav ben Tzruya, and because we talked about it and mentioned it in the context of Harugei Malchut, where does their property go? We got into the whole story of Yoav. What was he killed for? In the end, we wanted to show that he was killed because it was Merei b'Malchut, and from there we got into more details of that story. And then we went to the big machlok at the order, Skila Shref Hareg B'Chenek, or the opposite. Obviously, the Mishnah is in a particular order, and that's why we got into our Mishnayot in general in a very specific order. Rav Huna said, no, they're really not. Don't take them very seriously. You don't usually have to keep the order, although we saw many exceptions to the rule for what he said. And then we saw some cases where it was clear that he was trying to say not those cases. And, those cases really everyone agrees don't really matter the order. So in any case, we had a bit of a discussion about order and numbers and ordering. And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day and Shishma B'Sachot Tovot.